Welcome, everybody. We've got some folks starting to join, so I've got my cat who's joined as well. As we're waiting a couple minutes past the hour, we'll just give folks a little bit to join. I'd love to hear where people are joining from and what you're excited about, so feel free to jump in that Zoom chat. Let us know where you are and what you're excited to learn about. And if you want to toggle that message send to everyone, not just hosts and panelists, so everybody can enjoy, feel free to. And I'm also going to drop a link in there for everyone. This is a link to our Slido, so you can ask anonymous questions here throughout the workshop, and we'll make sure to get to those before the end. We'll probably get started in about 1 to 2 minutes, just give more folks time to join. All right, welcome everybody. We got a couple more folks have joined in. We're 3 minutes past hour. I think we're safe to get started, so we'll dive right in. And if you're just joining, let me just quickly reshare the link to our Slido. This is where you can submit questions. You can also submit them in the Zoom chat. I'll keep an eye, but we'll be more likely to not miss them in the Slido itself. All right, kicking off our Search in SQL Best Practices for Panther workshop. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. We'll do some quick introductions, myself and our lovely host. We're going to cover how to search quickly in Panther, how to search fast, and then we'll go into some workshop examples where we actually encourage you to jump into your instance and try things out, ask questions as you go, and learn by doing some hands-on work. And then we'll leave some time at the end just for Q&A, so keep those questions coming. All right. We've got Russell Layton, a principal software engineer on our investigations team, Alyssa Fox, a senior engineering manager on our data lake team, and then myself, I'm a CSM. I will be moderating, so I'll be the one making sure we get to your questions, answering anything that I can in the chat. And with that, let's kick it off with a poll. So I'm going to launch this in the Zoom real quick. I'd love to know, how comfortable are you with SQL? So we've got a scale of 1 to 5. 1, you're not comfortable. 5, you are an expert, like Russ and Alyssa are. So I'll give folks a minute to answer that. All right. Looks like we've got a pretty solid mix between 2 and 4. So it seems like everyone's in the right place. If you're on the lower end, you're going to learn a lot today. And I promise, even if you feel like you're a 4 or 5, you are going to walk away with some extra tips and tricks for getting the most out of Search in Panther. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to our wonderful hosts.
Would that be me?
Yes.
Okay, let me share.
Take it away.
That poll keeps popping up. I keep moving it. It keeps, sorry. Hold on. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, can everybody see my screen? It says quick searching in Panther. Somebody say yes. Okay. All right. I actually get the fun part of this presentation. Alyssa gets to do the SQL part. I'm actually going to talk to you about not writing SQL. So I'm going to give you just sort of my part here. I'm going to show you a few slides on ways you can interact with Panther to do searching that doesn't require any SQL, just to make sure you know that you're there, including a new feature, which is coming in the next release, our new query builder, which requires no SQL because it's a query builder. So I have short videos on most of these slides. I'm going to play them and then maybe comment on them a little. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat after each slide. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about indicator search. Indicator search is a facility that we have, a search screen that does what it sounds like. It allows you to search for common security indicators like IP addresses, hashes, ARNs, and such. And it searches all of your data. It searches every single table across your data lake in one query, and it does not require you to write any SQL. So let me just start with this demonstration to show you all those various features of indicator search.
Before I start,
let me make it full screen.
Indicator search. First thing I'd like to show you is our P&E fields. Notice in this event that we're looking at in Panther, we see P&E IP addresses, P&E trace IDs, P&E usernames. I'll talk more about the P&E fields later in detail, but in summary, the P&E fields are the indicator fields common in security questions, which are automatically extracted on data ingest. So in this particular case, there was a sign-in to Panther itself by me, username Russell Layton, a trace ID, which is a session ID for that sign-in, and my IP address. One thing I want you to notice is that for any of the P&E fields, there's a little magnifying glass next to some of the values, which allows you to do indicator search easily. Simply by clicking on it and clicking the run button there, we will get a summary of how many hits in this time interval this username had over the entire repository in the data lake, over all of your data. If I click on the hits here, we'll actually drill into the data. Now I'm going to do that in a moment, but I want to show you what happens when I say view in indicator search. This brings me to the full indicator search page. While we can get to it from the events, if you simply want to type in the indicators to search for, you just use the main menu over here under Investigate, click on Indicator Search, and you can type in whatever values you want, the date range. We default to auto-detecting the type, but that's not necessary. If you want to be specific and perhaps a little more efficient, you can actually pick different kinds of indicators here if you would like to do that. Notice that we also have a timeline and a summary. So if I want to get the details of exactly what was happening for the matches in that time interval for username Russell Layton, I can click on this and it opens up a window in our SQL shell called Data Explorer. Notice we generate some SQL for you and we show it to you. And there's a reason behind that. You don't need to touch it, and you should probably normally simply run it. But if you want to make small changes to it or understand what's going on, this is just add some transparency to that. So here's the data for that time interval associated with myself logging into Panther. And we can open it up in JSON style if you want it and expand it. And you can see all the hits and go through and continue your investigation that way. Coming back to indicator search, notice we have a timeline here. And we break things up into these little bar charts broken down into intervals, in this case of an hour over that time period. If I click on it, we'll actually run it again, but just for the time in that bar. So now we've narrowed it down a little bit further. And now, of course, we can see exactly these 4 events, and perhaps those are the ones that I'm interested in, perhaps around the time of a breach, some kind of intrusion. So that's how indicator search works. Before I start demonstrate.
That's my first of 3 indicator search slides. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I didn't see any, so I'm going to continue. A lot of people basically know how that works, what I just showed you, but there's a couple of other features I'm not sure all of our customers are aware of. First, if you go to indicator search, and this picture I have is actually the last demo, but I added an IP address to it. You can actually mix indicators. They don't, if you're in auto detect mode, have to be all the same kind of thing. So in this case, I added an IP to the previous demo's data, and notice I got more hits here because it's basically an OR across all of the items that you have in here. So if you want to sort of cast a wide net, you could put in a username, an IP address or an ARN, and actually search everything all at once. So that's something I want to make sure that all of our customers are aware of, that you can do this. There's one other really important feature of indicator search that not all our customers are aware of, and I have a short video to show you how to do this. This is what we call bulk indicator search.
This demonstration, I'm going to show you the bulk matching option for indicator search. So let's say I'm concerned about a certain active threat, and I go to my favorite threat provider, in this case, Gray Noise, and I'm interested in zero shell RCE attempt. Perhaps I'm concerned about that for some reason. So I want to take the set of active IPs and I want to match them against all of my data in the last, say, 6 months, just to be safe. So I go to download IP list, download the IP list, click on it, shows up in a spreadsheet. I copy, paste from the spreadsheet. I go over to indicator search. I simply paste them all in, go to the timeline. I say, last 6 months, just to be safe, apply and run. This database, by the way, has over 1.6 billion records in it in the last few months. And in 9 seconds, I've searched all of it. And indeed, I do have some hits from these sketchy IPs, some in AWS VPC Flow and some in ALB. And so if I were concerned about this, as I demonstrated in the previous videos, I would click on these hits and drill into the details and continue my investigation.
Okay. So
This demonstration, I'm going to
bulk indicator search. So I wanted to make everyone aware that they could do that. So that's it for indicator search. I want to talk about this new feature, which is coming in the next release. It's our new query builder. It's a simple query builder. I have a small video demonstration, which I'll show you in a moment. It is very similar to a BI tool, which allows you to point and click to create simple queries. It only does one shape of a query, which is basically select star from a particular table, and then you can have filters on it and a particular limit. We have lots of filter operators, so you can do almost anything you want. And in the results, we have a new feature called Pivot Anywhere, which I'm going to show you in the demo. And this is a new feature in beta coming, I believe, the next release. We have many new elaborations on this that are coming in subsequent releases. So this is just the beginning. So let me show you our new query builder, which I'm very excited about.
I want to introduce you to our new query builder. This query builder allows you to execute simple queries on single tables without having to know anything about SQL. So let me give you a short demonstration. You first pick a date range. We have some quick selections on this side, and we'll just, for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll just do the last 24 hours. You then pick which database you want. We'll pick the logs database. And then you have a choice of which table in that database to pick. I'm going to pick the Panther audit table. Lastly, you have an option to pick filters. So if I add a filter row, I now get the list of columns that were in the Panther audit table in this example. Picking one, like action name, gives me particular filtering operators. So in this case, this is a string. So I get is empty, is not empty, is not, is in list, does not have substring. We have quite a few of these operators. The operators are actually a function of the type of column it is. So x4 is an array of strings, And so you get slightly different operators for that, like has, does not have. In addition, if you want to filter on deeply nested fields, you can click on this link for the JSON object path and do something like a.b.c and then pick whatever operator you want to filter on very deeply nested fields. So in this example, I'm only going to do a very simple one. I'm going to pick action name and just say it's got to be present and run my search. What you'll first notice is you get a timeline to see where the activity is. And so that you can hover on these things and get a little more information. Clicking in will actually drill in to the data. And you get a display very similar to how Data Explorer does of the results of the query. Expanding it, I want to highlight something. This is essentially the same display that's in Data Explorer, but with our new query builder and simple search facility, we have a new feature for you. Remember in the previous demonstration on indicator search, you can click on the p-any fields and run an indicator search like this. Well, now in the query builder, in fact, I can do that on any field. So for example, actor name is Russell Layton. I can do that and I can run a search over all my data for anything that has actor.name equals Russ Layton. Clicking here will drill down as usual with indicator search and give me actually the details. Notice actor name equals Russ Layton. In addition, if you go over to view in indicator search, we have a new option here called simple search, and you see actor.name equals Russ Layton. In fact, with indicator search now in simple search mode, you can search for any name equals value pair across all of your data without having to specify anything else. And that is a short summary of our new query builder. I want to introduce you to our new query builder.
Having technical difficulties. There we go. And so that's it for my section, showing you ways not having to write SQL. So, query builder. Can we join different tables? No, that is not in the first version. I think we will extend it in the future to allow that, but we're working on baby steps right now. You obviously can do it in SQL, and there's an option to generate SQL in the Data Explorer from the query builder. But we will be evolving towards, generalizing that. The other thing we'll be evolving towards, as I mentioned in that indicator search where you just type in a type, will allow you to put expressions in there as well. So we're basically going to improve generally the search experience from just a simple SQL shell to sort of a BI tool to sort of a more of an elastic search mode. We're going to have all of these available to you over the course of the year. And the query builder is the first thing in this very simple mode that you're going to get in the next few weeks. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Alyssa.
Give me 1 sec to pull the slides up. I thought we were going to just continue. So give me just 1 sec. Are people excited about the query builder? I'm very excited about it. 1 second. It's ready to go. Let me share my screen. And let's go to isn't here. Ooh. Let's see. You're still seeing my whole screen, is that correct? All right. Can you see everyone? Yay. Okay. Thanks for bearing with our technical difficulties. So Russ just talked through all the options we have for you to query that are not writing raw SQL, although some of us do prefer that. Those are really exciting. But what I want to talk through is if you are writing SQL using the Data Explorer, some of our tips and tricks to make your querying much faster and more performant, which is really exciting. I want to highlight first and foremost that we have several query examples in our documents for common log sources. And we have these for two kind of areas. We have it for more of like a threat hunting, looking for something specific, and also examples for scheduled queries that let you help detect things. So definitely take a look in our logs, definitely take a look in our docs for different things you can write over your logs, and let us sort of do some of the work for you. You can also change those to work for the needs that you have. Before we start any of this, we do acknowledge searching security data is hard. The volume of data is really significant. So it's really important to write performant queries to be able to get the results that you need. So one, which we now actually encourage you to do from the Data Explorer UI, but always include a limit clause. If you're returning hundreds of thousands of rows, that's going to be quite slow. And oftentimes you just want to know if something does or does not exist. So we really do encourage that you use a limit clause. We don't have a streaming function, so we can't tell you, we return the entire results of the query. So one of the benefits you can have here is just kind of seeing, is this even going on in my log source at all? One note is that we also limit the results returned, and we can increase this limit if it's something that you're running into that you need to return more data than this. But typically we recommend, sticking to this limit. And part of the reason why limiting your total result set is important. Another one, and this specifically speaks to fast queries, is that you always want to be using either a p event time or our macro p occurs sense. We use these as clustering keys within Snowflake. And this means we're able to very quickly find the micro partition where your data is located and not having to scan a very large table. Many of our customers have tables 100 terabytes plus. We don't want to have to scan all that data. So by using something that we are already using as a cluster key, that allows us to scan much less data. I understand that sometimes you don't know where something is, but if you can even just start with a small time window, that can often make your queries significantly more performant. Yeah. These are a couple of examples. So you can use either p event time between two dates, or you can use this macro, p occurs sense, which allows you to just input 100 days ago, those sorts of things. Another suggestion we have for querying quickly is using our p_any_ whatever it is field. We, as part of the ingest into Panther, extract this data out of your logs. So things like IP addresses or instance or account IDs, we're already pulling out, which means that if you are searching on these, it will be much quicker if you're able to leverage these in either your where or and, in addition to using the p_event time or occurs between. The smaller amount of data we can look for, the better. So anything you can do to lessen your result set will certainly make your queries more performant. So definitely recommend using these. Yeah, we can keep moving. I don't know if there's any questions. I haven't been monitoring the chat. But
You're all set.
Yes. So another note is that Snowflake is a column-oriented store. The way you can make your returning of results much faster is by just querying the data that you need. So instead of we all love a select star to figure out like what is going on. And I think if you're exploring your data, a select star while limiting to a very small result set is a great option. However, it can make it so that it takes longer to return your results. And so if you're able to narrow down your select to just a couple of fields, that can also make things much faster. So anytime you could do that, definitely an improvement. So what Snowflake is really good at is analytical queries. And so if you're able to summarize your data, you're going to be able to get results even over a very large data set very quickly. So if, for example, you're just interested, like, did this happen at all? Doing something like a count star, counting all over your data set will perform very quickly. Summaries are something that Snowflake really excels at. You can also use this to try and see patterns in your data. So if we look at this try this query we have here, what we're doing is looking at the results, grouped by hour, and that can allow you to see trends pretty quickly. Although, as Russ showed you, you could have much prettier graphs if you use other components of it. You can definitely do this in Data Explorer as well. So anytime you're able to sort of leverage what Snowflake's really good at, which in this case is analytical queries, definitely do it. If you're running a query and it's taking a long time to execute, sort of my first thing to do would be like, stop that query and then do a count star and just see how much data it's going to return. And we'll talk through that in the workshop component. But if you're trying to return 100 million rows, something like that, you're going to be waiting a really long time, and ultimately that query will time out. But it's important information to know going into it. And like I said, because we don't have streaming, this is a really good way to kind of get an understanding of what's going on with the data. So what do I do if my query is still really slow? Just what I touched on, count the rows, see how much data we're really looking at, get a sense so we can have, we know what we're actually trying to return in the UI. Another is to reduce the time range. So it's very tempting to not put a time range. You're like, I'm curious if this happened at any time. But as we mentioned, that P event time is a cluster key, which tells us exactly where to look for that data. So anytime you're able to reduce the number of partitions that Snowflake is scanning, the faster you're going to have your results. So try reducing the time range just to see if that improves your query time. Another option is if you are on the managed Snowflake, so your Snowflake is set up through Panther, you can reach out to us and we can talk about upsizing your Snowflake warehouse. That's something we can definitely help with. If you're on the connected Snowflake model, that's something you and your team could do for yourself. And it may be that the types of queries and the amount of data that you're traversing just requires a larger warehouse. And that's one of the benefits of Snowflake, is that we can very easily give you more processing power. And it's certainly something that we can do. In addition, as I mentioned kind of at the beginning component of this, querying this type of data is really challenging. Sometimes it's deeply nested, or you have a ton of it and you're trying to answer a question. Please ask questions in your Slack. Your CS team, Russ and I here want to help and get you the answers that you need. So definitely don't struggle in silence. We're here to help. And we can definitely work on query optimization. It's actually something that Russ and I enjoy doing quite a bit. So please reach out if you have a query that you're just really struggling with. I can pause for questions here about some of the things our tips and tricks that we recommend for querying. And then otherwise we can walk into kind of the workshop component where you're welcome to pull up your own Panther instance and we can look through an example. You may not have the log source I'm going to use specifically, but we can definitely work through it so that you can try some of the things that we're working through here.
Do you have any questions that have come in while you were covering those tips and tricks? So I've just reshared the Slido link for folks as we dive into the workshop. Feel free to ask there or in the Zoom Q&A or the Zoom chat. I'm keeping my eyes on all of the windows and I'll make sure to get to those. And after the workshop, we'll have some dedicated Q&A time.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I wasn't planning on sharing my screen, but the good news is we could just pop right over here to the Data Explorer tab that I already have open. So if you are able to, I would suggest logging into your Panther instance and we can walk through a couple of examples together. Otherwise, this is recorded. Like I said, our docs also have some great examples you can use. But otherwise, I'm going to walk through a couple of just examples of querying and how you can make things go a little bit quicker. So if you're in your Panther instance, you'll go to Investigate and then down to Data Explorer, and that will provide you this UI to write SQL queries. I'm guessing many of you are familiar with this. So to start, I would say we're not following a lot of the best practices here, but we're selecting all from CloudTrail logs. We're looking at the last 100 days, and we are looking for something specific. We are also adding an order by. And note that we didn't talk about earlier, but is important to state, is that when you do an order by in Snowflake, that requires you, even if you add a limit, you're still having to order all of the data and then just return some of it. So an order by doesn't necessarily, if you have a limit, your order by is going to more or less negate it. It will affect how much data is returned, but not how long the query takes to process. So let's run this and see what happens. So we're running a query, we're waiting for it to run. And it might take a while. So what we can see here is that the result size exceeded the 100 megabyte limit, which we knew might happen. So I'm like curious, like, well, how much data are we trying to return? So one thing we can do here is go ahead and add that aggregation, just like we talked about. And for the purposes of this, I'll just remove the order by because it doesn't matter. We're just aggregating across all of this data. So I'll go ahead and run that query and we'll see what happens. So it returned very quickly. We're talking about less than a second. We're scanning a relatively low amount of data here, but we can see that what we were trying to return is over 100,000 rows. Definitely not usable by a human eye to see what's going on there, but helpful to understand why we're up against that 100 megabyte limit. And so it's definitely good to aggregate there. Otherwise, I can keep, is there any questions? Otherwise, I can continue on kind of with the workshop. And if you are open in your Panther instance, I definitely would suggest run a query, see what happens, and then run an aggregation and see what happens too. I can give a little pause for people to try that on their own instances.
And we did have one question come in the Q&A. Is there a place where the P&E helper functions are defined and or documented?
Mm-hmm.
I believe they're in our documentation. Russ, correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll put it in the chat. Yes, they are. The macros
you,
I think you're talking about. I'll put a link in the chat.
They're really helpful. The next thing I'll do is kind of think through how we might be searching this data. So, okay, we know there's a ton of it to return. So let's take a look at just a single value. I want to see like the shape. I want to see what fields there are. I just want to get a sense of kind of what's going on here. So I am going to do a select star here so we get all of the columns, but I am going to limit it to just one so that we can return a much smaller amount of data and get a sense of kind of what it's looking like. So here in Data Explorer, you can see the query return time. You are able to download these results. So this is something that you can download, add to case notes, whatever it might be. You can come over here and hit View JSON, and that'll give you the shape of the data. So we can see here kind of all the fields, as well as those fields we've pulled out as the P&E fields that we talked about earlier. You can also click expand all here, and that will open everything up. So you're not individually clicking. But that gives you a sense of kind of what's going on in these particular data set, and that can be really helpful. So we went ahead and saw that there's over 100,000 rows. I'll pause there. I guess if people are still, I don't know if people are following along at home, but if you are, you can take a look at kind of that's in my way of getting a sense of kind of what is going on in this data set specifically, what fields might I want to pull out to look for. A next step that we can take is to do an aggregation, not unlike what we talked about with what you saw with a timeline. So let's decrease this down. We don't need to see 100 days worth of data. So let's just look at the last day. And let's do a count just to see what we're looking at over one day. We don't have to remove the limit, but we can just for ease here. So if we change the P occurs sense to just one day, we can get a sense of, okay, that's a much like smaller amount of data and more manageable. But let's take a look at how many events we're seeing per hour. This is pretty easily done in SQL and also takes advantage of what Snowflake's really good at, which is aggregation. And you can also leverage, we use Snowflake syntax here. So if there's something you have questions about, you can also look up the Snowflake documentation, which I think is linked in our docs as well. And that can answer some of your more advanced SQL querying Snowflake specifically. So in this case, we're going to use a date underscore. We're going to do a date trunk, and we're going to put hour. And then we'll do it by the P event time. So we'll leverage that field. Yep, and we can see it's just available to us there. Anytime you're doing an aggregation like this, you also need to use a group by. So we will say, we'll call that as hourly grouping. And we'll call this as, you can see, number of events. And we'll say group by hourly grouping. Let's hope that that runs as we expected to. Ooh. Oh, I have. There we go. So here you can see that you have hourly grouping and the number of events. This is really helpful. Now we can see like how often things are happening. The ordering of this is sort of all over the place. So if we wanted to see it sequenced by time, we could also add an order by here. And we can do that also by hourly grouping. And then it'll really nicely show us like sequentially. And then we're able to see, was there a spike? Is something unexpected? Hourly, this looks pretty consistent. But you'd be able to look into that there. Are there any questions? Are people following along? If you have something that's come up, you know, as you've been querying, we're happy to walk through examples of that too.
We did have a question come through in the chat. How quick is using this array underscore contains macro?
When you say quick, you mean from like a performance standpoint, I assume?
Yes.
I think it's pretty quick. I haven't experienced directly any performance problems with it. It's a Snowflake specific. It's not the P occurs since is something we have for Panther. But I guess Russ, do you have any other context?
One thing to say is, I mean, in general, it's going to be depending on how long the array that you're searching is. For these indicator P any fields, I mean, it's very common to, they're typically not long, right? So all the IP addresses in any event, there's usually one or two, sometimes three unique ones. So because the arrays are very short, this performs extremely well.
And then we also had a question come through on the Slido. Is there guidance on when I should use a limit and when it's okay to remove it?
I would say always use a limit. I understand that you probably, I would kind of proceed with caution. So once you know how much data you're going to get returned with that count star, then I would say if it's 4 events, throw the limit out the window. In general, I would say do leverage the limit. I know that that's hard sometimes because you're like, I'm not getting all of the results. But by leveraging the count star, you know how many to expect. Russ, do you have more color you want to add to that one?
It's basically it. The other place you don't need it is this example when you're going over a day. So, and a grouping by hours, so you're not going to have more than 24. So that's certainly fine. So if you know the number is low and something that you can manageably look at, then you don't need a limit. I mean, it'll just not work if you do it, or it could take quite some time. So I personally always put a limit on, except in very small numbers of circumstances.
We do kindly suggest that you use a limit from even within the UI, as you can see here. But for an example like this, where you're using an aggregation, often not needed. I mean, if you're traversing trillions of rows potentially, but overall, if you're aggregating, you wouldn't need to do that. I see in the chat, in our case, we typically have dense events in 1 to 2 hour windows and often keep hitting this 100 megabyte limit. I definitely understand why that would be frustrating.
And do you want to go through, this is for the person asking the question, do you actually want to go through all that? Say we make that a gigabyte. Would you go through all that data? Are you trying to do exports or something? And we can make that as big as you want. It's just there for safety. But in practice, most people can't, if it's interactive, can't look at 100 megabytes of data and wouldn't want to. Yeah, an export case, it makes sense. And less so if you're just kind of hunting. So that number can be moved. We can make it anything you want. It's just there for safety.
And it's definitely something we can bring back to our product team too, of like being able to potentially export a lot more data than you might need to see. Like you're not going to go through 100,000 rows in the UI and just like scan through it, but I understand for documentation and things why you might want to export. So I could definitely make sure that that gets back to our product team too.
Yeah, just to give a little context, the reason that's there, and I say for safety, is if we made it really large and people weren't following these best practices, select star from table with no limit, it could, because it won't fail for a very long time, maybe hours, you might wait an hour for this thing to finish and maybe ultimately fail, who knows? You might lose patience with it. So I think the answer, well, right now, you can just make it whatever you like. And perhaps in the future, Alyssa was alluding to, maybe we could have 2 limits, one for an export and one for regular querying. And again, those could be set to whatever you like. So those are good suggestions.
In your particular case, please open a ticket with your support team in your Slack channel, and we can raise that limit for you specifically. My guess is you might still hit it depending on how high we raise it, but we definitely can raise it for you. So please open a ticket so we can help. Are there other questions? I think those are the examples I wanted to walk through here. And I know we were planning to go over to have, a healthy dose of Q&A. So I can switch over back to this document and to our questions, and then we can answer anything that you have.
Definitely. Yeah, folks, now is the time to get your questions in. You have some real subject matter experts here. So if there's a query you're looking for some help with, or general questions on best practices, or like that last example, what do we do? And we keep hitting this issue over and over. Now is certainly the time to ask. There's nothing new in this Slido right now or in the chat. So I'll give folks a minute to get those questions in.
I will just, give another plug for our documentation. Russ recently wrote a really cool example that looks at successful logins after several failed for Okta. And that you can then use that in a scheduled query and ultimately in a detection. So there's some really cool stuff in there with quite advanced SQL. And so definitely leverage that if it's something that could be helpful to your team. What is the most optimal way to query for IOCs and indicator search?
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, you can cut and paste up to, I forget, 100 indicators into indicator search.
Oh, we have a raised hand.
Hi, this is Amin. I am the one who kind of asked the question. So typically, the way I understand an indicator search is it spans across all the data sets that defines that IOC or indicator.
Yes.
Say that perhaps I want to prioritize the search to look for, data sets before others, understanding that this is a very large kind of search, trying to pull data from the various data streams. Are there best practices that we should be following there?
So this is on our roadmap to actually allow you in indicator search to pick tables and databases, to restrict it so that maybe you don't waste time looking at things you don't care about. I think that's where you're going with that, because it does run them all at once. But that's on the roadmap. However, I can give you a workaround. You can run indicator search just as it is, okay? But there's a button on at the bottom after you get some results. So it says View in Data Explorer. Now it's a little bit ugly, but it will actually show you the SQL that's running. And then you can go in and just pick just a couple of the tables that you like if it's not running as fast as you like because you have enormous amounts of data. Because it is an elaborate SQL query, not something you'd want to do by hand, but it will generate it for you. So you can actually see it and just cut out the tables you don't want and run it. So that's a workaround. But we do have it on our roadmap to allow you to pick both databases and tables in indicator search. It would default to everything, but then maybe you only wanted to search one or two and it would run a lot faster. So that's on the roadmap. It's a good question.
A follow-up question I guess I have is, are you currently seeing timeouts with indicator search? Is it mostly that you're trying to prioritize a particular data set, or you're actually running into performance issues when you're using indicator search?
If the question is for me, so essentially we have multiple sources, and sometimes we want data samples to start showing up for my source before others, just because the time it takes to search across. That was the what was behind my question. Yeah,
right now the best way to do that is either move it and edit the SQL, which is an option, or just reduce your time range because it doesn't have that option. Now, what we're actually changing to, if you want the samples, you noticed in my query builder example where you got a timeline and then you got to see some of the data. We're actually going to do that for indicator search too. So at the bottom, you'll get some samples of your data, and it should come fairly quickly. Because we're only going to page them in sort of as you need them. Because again, Snowflake doesn't have the streaming mode like a Splunk or an Elastic, but we can be, as in Panther, the application can be actually somewhat clever about that. So by adding the samples directly at the bottom, much like in the query builder, and also giving you a choice of tables and stuff, I think we can give you exactly what you need. And those things are all coming over the next few months. So you'll be able to pick the tables and be able to see all the results together. So yeah, that's all coming in the near future.
Katie, are there other questions in the Slido?
Not yet. So definitely get those in there. Oh, we just got one. Does the Data Explorer support all of the different Snowflake search functions?
Yep.
Yep.
It's just a SQL shell. There's not much between you and Snowflake there, except for our macros. That's it. So yeah, you can do all sorts of fancy things.
So you get more with the Panther UI because you do get those macros, but anything that's supported in Snowflake, we do support. Yep.
The other thing that just it's really something for later, maybe. Let me go back to the our documentation. This is like super fancy, but I know in security, like sort of the holy grail is doing sequence detection. So I want to point this out for the few advanced Snowflake people here. Here's the link to it. Snowflake has a function called match recognize, and there's a lot of documentation on it. And it really is the only way to do reliable sequence recognition. And you would use a scheduled query for this, but this is an example in our documentation of using it, but it is advanced, but it does give you lots of ways to do very sophisticated, give me an alert when this, and this happens sort of in order. So it's something to consider because more advanced detections, certainly in trying to keep your false alarms down, usually consists of aggregating things, joining things, related things, and also potentially insisting that there's a time progression before you alert on something. And this is an example of how to do that. Super useful.
give a little tour here. We have scheduled query examples, which this one is a very good one. And then if you also go to Data Explorer, we have some examples there as well.
Well, let's give folks a minute or two if they have questions they want to get in, but we won't hold everyone here until the top of the hour if everyone has had their questions answered. Just wanted to plug a couple other resources that you have. If you have follow-up questions about this, we're going to share the recording in the community. I know we've given you a lot of information. We want you to have access to it. Feel free to follow up there if you have questions. If there's something in particular you want to follow up on about your instance, like expanding your limit, like we just talked about, definitely open a support ticket in your Slack channel. And just one thing I wanted to plug is after this workshop ends on the Zoom, you'll be redirected to a page with a very short survey. There's only one required question. I'd really appreciate if you could give us feedback on this workshop. And we did just get another question in. Can we add data results as additional context to alerts?
Depends what you mean by that, but when you use the alert context function in the Python detections, that ends up in the P alert context field, and that's where you can add enrichment data that's applied at the time that your Python rule fires. In addition, if you use lookup tables, for example, we have IP info and gray noise for free for you, and you can have your own. Those are automatically added to your alerts in a field called P enrichment. So, for example, if you enable IP info and you have something with IP addresses in it, you will see all that good, IP geo information automatically appended to your event in the rules engine and also in the associated alert. In addition, we've actually done some opinionated things because we're integrating with IP info specifically. If you look into our new Slack bot, it actually allows you to interact with alerts, and that enrichment data is actually sort of built into it, at least for IP addresses.
If I may, really quick, I do appreciate the answer, but I want to expand on the question. So typically in our org, we do leverage the packs, the alerts packs that Panther provides us. We want to add our own enrichments, our own lookups, so that we put in meaningful contextual information in those alerts. So that the responder doesn't spend a lot of time trying to figure things out.
Absolutely.
Things are going to get complex. We want to pull data from various means, from various tables. Is it possible?
If you're talking about doing extra queries and then appending them to the alert, as opposed to a lookup table, lookup tables would be the way to do that for lookup tables.
Even for dynamic
for actual log data, that's actually not something you'd want to do in the mainline stream because it would probably overload Snowflake if you think about it. But I do know that you'd want to do it on the output of alerts. So what we've actually been talking about, it's not a thing we have today, was actually associating enrichment queries with a detection, and then you could run them in the UI or run them interactively. The danger of running them automatically is if you have something that's getting 1,000 alerts a second, you could overload Snowflake potentially. But I do hear you. That is a very interesting thing to do. It's again something that we've discussed. It's not on our roadmap because we haven't prioritized that yet, but I will take that back as it was my favorite thing to do, which is exactly what you were talking about, was have arbitrary queries to get arbitrary data and have it run and enrich an alert after the fact, so that information is just there. That way it avoids complicated runbooks, right? Because that's what you would have to do. Otherwise, you'd have to go, well, when you get this alert, do this, this, and this, and it should be automated for them. Some of our customers actually do query Snowflake directly from the Python engine, but it is not, unless you really know what you're doing, it's not a good idea because of this, hard to control case for it. So I'll bring that back because the way I was describing it is something that I personally wanted to prioritize, sort of doing what you're suggesting, but doing it in a way that where you don't have to worry about overloading the database. But today you'll have to either use lookup tables directly, which you supply, but the logs themselves, there isn't a good way to do that in an automated fashion today.
Final moments for any additional questions anybody has. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. Definitely take your follow-up questions to the community, to your Slack channel with support, and follow up with your CSM if you're not sure where to go for help. We really appreciate you being here. And like I said, when you get directed to that survey, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to fill out that one required question. And then there's a couple more if you have any additional feedback. Thank you so much, everybody. I think we can wrap up, give you all a couple minutes for your next Zoom meetings. And thank you to Russ and Alyssa. Really, like I said, we have some true subject matter experts here. Much appreciated. Thank you, everybody. Bye.